So here I am at my little bit of paradise in North Eugene, the house and yard I call Calliope Corner. Even though I haven't yet seen a Calliope hummingbird here, I'm sure I will eventually. It's now been nearly 5 weeks, 4 weeks and 6 days since I did my last video tour of the yard, and a lot has happened since then. There's so many plants now. I thought I'd break this into 4 different videos and get a bit of each and every plant that I have in the yard, a lot of which I've planted and a lot which were here from the previous owners. And yeah, this will be a nice record for myself as well as for my friends and family who aren't able to come visit right now. Starting here at the front gate, last time I did this video, the tulips were the last to be blooming here, and they are done and still green, so they're storing their energy in their bulbs for next year. But coming into bloom now is this beautiful flower called rose campion, and it's actually something of a weed here. It reseeds prolifically, and I pulled a ton of it out. I left a very select few, but it's not hard to pull out. It's not super invasive and needs absolutely no care whatsoever. And this is my Daphne odora, which I planted here and is doing quite nicely. I think it's a very good spot for it. And in this spot I want some color and other flowers, so I sowed a bunch of nasturtiums here. This is actually a second sowing. The first batch didn't take. It was a variety called mahogany. I think I soaked the seeds too long. And this variety is called Jewel Blend, and it's a dwarf, so little bushy ones. And I also put in a perennial tall shrubby fuchsia here, and hopefully that'll take over. I had originally thought I'd put some sweet peas that would grow up the wall here, but I don't think it's a sunny and warm enough place, and of all the ones I've planted, there only one sprouted. It's alive, so it might yet bloom and do something. And then also last time over here I had this empty half barrel, and I have since filled it with a good potting soil and some flowers. These are lobelias that'll drape over the edge, and then put 3 tuberous begonias in here of different varieties. Only one of them is up now. It'll be nice and colorful, and I'll have to water that. The pansies that I put in here are very happy in this particular spot. I'm constantly deadheading them so they don't think they're done blooming for the year. So I just pluck off the dead flowers. The snails and maybe the earwigs like nibbling on the buds in it, and it leaves these flowers with holes, so I'm constantly out here trying to control them, pick them, and I put out sluggo, which is supposedly non-toxic to wildlife. And I also put in a bunch of nasturtiums here. 2 of the original sowing of the mahogany took. The rest are in just little tiny things here, and I put in another different species of fuchsia over here. Hopefully we'll eventually attract hummingbirds, and again there's the sweet peas that didn't take so well. And in my neighbor's yard you can see this wonderful patch of rose campion here. They just left growing, which is nice. So this video I'll just do the right or eastern half of the front yard here and talk about all the plants that we're seeing in here. First of all, you can see where I've covered the lawn with bark mulch and first cardboard and then this fir bark. The yarrow that might have been part of the lawn mix, or might have just grown here naturally, is found ways to creep out between the gaps in the cardboard, and it's going to make a nice yarrow meadow here. It's an aggressive plant, but it's not really a weed. It's native, and the flowers are liked by many pollinators, so this will just become a dominant plant in the meadowish system I have here. I just now noticed this walnut growing here thanks to the squirrels, which plant all kinds of seeds here. Amazing how fast things can grow in the right climate. So I planted this native snowberry. There were probably something like 50 plants that I stuck in the ground, and I got from 3 different sources, a native nursery. I bought this bleeding heart here. I bought 2 of them and planted them, and then I realized that there's a big patch of it behind this shed here, which you'll see in the 3rd video. I planted this native Delphinium trollifolium. This is a shady little spot of the yard, doesn't get a whole lot of sun, and this is a nice woodland understory plant that'll be get up to about 4 feet tall in bushy and thickets, and hummingbirds like them. This is a Indian plum, or also called osoberry now, but I learned it as Indian plum, one of my favorite plants because it starts blooming already in January, turns green very early, and has fruits that birds like. It's an excellent native landscaping plant, and it'll get to be a 15-foot tall small tree here, maybe even bigger. These were all plants that the previous owners had here, 2 different kinds of bleeding heart. This is an Asian bleeding heart, and I don't know the ferns, like a wood fern and obviously a native sword fern. And I think this is our same species as our native bleeding heart, but just a white version. And I put this Oregon grape here from my friend Alan. He wanted to get rid of them, so I biked over there, dug it up, and stuck 3 of them in the ground here. And if I'd known I'd had those, I probably wouldn't have bought the Oregon grapes that I put in the ground, but it doesn't hurt to have several. So I planted this Oregon grape here. This plant over here that starts here and goes up this pole is a clematis that I transplanted here. The previous owners had put it in a bed in the middle of the front of the house, and it didn't really have a trellis. I think they just stuck it in last year. It's a variety called Ramona. From what they left the tag with it, so I was able to look it up and see it should have beautiful purple flowers. I don't know if it'll bloom this year, but it's obviously a very young plant. Last year it didn't get much taller than about 2 feet, and I'm trying to train it up to stay in these hoops of wire as a trellis. I haven't yet figured out what to put up here for it, but I might just put some screw eyes and a wire for it to clamber across. Got some time, although it has grown fast. So this was going to be the start of my native brushy prairie here, and I just stuck in 5 perennial natives, but obviously you can see the yard has evolved gradually. Here's another Oregon grape. This is a native violet. I keep forgetting the species, but it's a little purple flower, and I hope reseeds and spreads throughout. This is a twinberry honeysuckle, which seems to like this place a lot. This is a Ceanothus cuneatus buckbrush, and the flowers of this are loved by a lot of pollinators, and this is all new growth this year. So I thought it was a much more slowly growing plant than that, but we'll see. This is a Lupinus polyphyllus, a native lupin to the Willamette Valley, and this is actually a little shoot off of a larger one that's behind me that you'll see in a minute. But the bumblebees love it. This is Bombus vosnezenskyii, the yellow-faced bumblebee, and you see his shy pollen sacs on the sides of the legs. He's been visiting pollen from elsewhere because that's a yellow pollen on his legs, and this plant here has a very dark orangey pollen. It's one of 3 species of bumblebees I've seen in the yard. And then another native that I planted over here, I have several around the yard, is this tall Camus lictlinii. And this is a gloriosa daisy, also known as Rudbeckia, black-eyed Susan daisy. My neighbor Lisa has a lot of these that volunteer in her yard, and she's like me, can't stand to throw away volunteers even though there's no space for them, so she dug them up and brought a whole bunch of nice plants over for me that are good pollinating plants, useful plants. This little plot here, I had some extra sunflower seeds when I was sowing, and I just decided to stick them in the dirt, and I now have 14 sunflowers here, and there's 3 different varieties. 2 varieties came in a single packet called 2 Queens. One is reddish and one is yellow, and they grow about 6 to 8 feet tall. And then the really big one is called Pike's Peak, and it gets up to 15 feet tall. So I'm going to have a big forest of sunflowers here if the squirrels don't kill them first. But I've actually thinned already out maybe half of what was sprouting in here. They're doing very well. And this is my exciting popcorn patch. I sort of had this as an idea. I might put corn somewhere, didn't know where. I just counted the seeds, how big of a spot I needed, and this just sort of came together. I had a 56% germination rate. I put 2 seeds in each spot, and so some spots didn't have any, and they transplanted quite nicely. This plant here was all by itself before I put the corn and the sunflowers in, and this is a Amelanchier or serviceberry, a native small tree with fruits that birds like. I don't know what else, how many different kinds of arthropods will utilize this plant, but it'll be a nice feature in the yard. Continuing down this strip here to the far end, I had another little plot of natives in here. I had 3 natives. There's the camas. This is the tallest of the 5 red flowering currants that I planted around the yard. It actually had flowers this spring. It will be the first hummingbird plant to bloom in the spring. It's a beautiful species, and rufous hummingbirds love them. And this is a native grass called roamer's fescue. I got 3 of those. But I gradually filled things in. Among my favorite plants are fragrant flowers, and so I did plant a tea rose here, and this one is called Perfume Delight, and it is suffering from powdery mildew as they usually do, but I'm trying to keep it clean. I started a lot of tomatoes from seeds, and I got the seeds late, so Territorial was well overwhelmed this year with seed orders, so they could not get things out. It took them 6 weeks to get me my seed order in, and so I was really late getting them started there. This one is an heirloom called Marriage Marzinera, and an indeterminate type, so maybe by September I will have some fruit off of this thing. We'll see. And then I felt sorry for some bulbs that the store was getting rid of just a week or so ago, week and a half. So I bought these 50% off plants that would have died, and among them were Tigridia, which is a type of iris, and 2 of them are coming up here. And I splurged and bought 6 fancy chrysanthemums from a perennial nursery in Ohio called Bluestone, and I'm sure they'll do fine. Some of them will attract lots of pollinators, and it'll be a big splash of color late in the season. Hopefully they'll be blooming by September or October. This one here is called First Lady, and it's pink with quill-like ray petals. I also started lots of annuals by seed indoors, as well as scattering seeds out and about the yard. So all along the edge of the corn here, I'm going to have marigolds coming up. There's seedlings here. There's some there at the base of the red flowering currant. This little patch here to the right of the steps had some perennials from the previous owner, such as the oriental poppies, which they grow well here, but if it's been too cool and wet, they get overcome by a fungal disease, and they get floppy, and some of the heads turn black. But this, I've pulled quite a few out, and I keep deadheading them so they keep blooming, but I'm going to let this one go to seed. What else did I plant in here? I planted lots of carnations and zinnias around the edges of the beds from seeds I started. So this is one of my carnations, and this is one of 10 zinnias that came from a packet of 10 seeds. The packet cost $5. I didn't realize it was such a rare, difficult to seed zinnia, but they're very healthy and looking very nice, and they'll be good. Behind the floppy poppy here is a chrysanthemum that I actually bought last year, just for its color, as a color spot. I didn't really expect that it would survive, but it survived in that half barrel, and I repotted it over here. I think it's sort of a maroon flowered double thing. I don't remember exactly. There was a big open space here in the middle, so I went to the store to look for something that would be a splash of color, and I found this dwarf canna. And here's a poinsettia from a Thanksgiving gift from my realtor that survived over the winter in the house, and I didn't want to throw it away, so I stuck it in the ground, and it's got tons of new shoots. I planted this heliotrope here for the fragrance right near the walkway, as well as this nicotiana. I wanted to start nicotiana from seed, but I couldn't find any for some weird reason. They were easy to find seed of it from and grow when I was in high school, but the varieties seem to be more compact and open flowers during the day, and hopefully I'll eventually find one of the original varieties that are even more fragrant. On April 26th, I scattered a whole bunch of chamomile seeds around the yard, and this is a result of that. There are 6 of them here. There's about 20 others all around the yard. I love chamomile tea, so I'm happy for that. Here's another Daphne odora that I mistakenly planted in a spot that gets absolute full sun, which is good for it during the winter and these cool days like this, but during the heat of the summer, this might get a bit sunburned. Thyme and lemongrass right near the front of the house, so the easy access. And here's another one of the chrysanthemums that I bought. This is called Sheffield. I think it's a pink one. I scattered a few nasturtium seeds. I had extras around the yard, and they've come up. These primroses and the cyclamen were early spring color spots I stuck in the ground. They're still alive. They may or may not survive the summer. And then over here, on this strip over here, I put in another Indian plum, another giant sunflower, and then there's some natives that I planted along the edge here, including this another twinberry honeysuckle. And these 2 excellent plants for pollinators are called coyote bush. It's a Baccharis in the sunflower family, with male and female plants are separate, but I think I got 2 female plants. I don't know if it's easy for them to tell apart, but I had requested 1 female, 1 male. And there's a columbine there, and then one of the bleeding hearts underneath this staghorn sumac thicket. I don't know how long these sumacs have been here, but it's always a struggle to keep them in bounds. They put out sprouts all over the ground. I have to constantly go around and pull suckers. And let's see, another native plant that I did not plant, but is a wonderful accent on the arborvitae here, is this coastal manroot, Mara oregana, M-A-R-A-H. It is in the cucumber family, one of 2 species of cucumbers native to Oregon. This one still has a few male flowers open, and female flowers appear below, but they result in these spiny cucumbers. They're toxic, but it's easy to not eat them. The neighbor was pulling it up, thinking that it was harming the trees, and I quickly informed him, and he was happy to leave it there. And then I was going to cover, and one last bit here was this little island in the middle with this Italian plum. They may have overproduced last year. I was told it had hundreds of fruits. This year I find maybe a couple of green plums on it, and I wouldn't be surprised if the stupid fox squirrels pluck them off and eat them before they ripen. These yellow marguerite daisies, or chrysanthemums, or Shasta daisies were here and very small plants last year, so I think they must have planted them early in the spring last year. They are big and huge, and I will probably move them, or at least a couple of them, to other parts of the garden come next February and March. This is obviously a smaller cultivar, and this is a non-native penstemon, and probably a hybrid for the garden. It's blooming beautifully, and this was sort of an accident. I was weeding around the yard in February, and it broke off the base of the mother plant, and I didn't think it would survive. It had almost no roots. I just plucked it in the ground, and wow, it's done well. Some of the German chamomile that has done really well, and here I put in some of the annuals all along the edge. This is a dianthus carnation. Oh, I had some seedlings of chives I didn't know where to put, and there's a zinnia, and here's where I got rid of one of the oriental poppies, and I don't know if I'll put anything in its place. I did move a little tiny marigold over here. Just one of the most advanced nasturtiums in the yard, and wonderful little mushroom that I haven't identified yet. Helps Susanna. Around the other side here, there's a whole bunch of chamomile coming up there. I had a lot of seedlings of columbine pop up all over the yard, so I couldn't throw them out. I just plunked them in the ground all over the place, and here's one of those. This is the big mother of the other native Lupinus polyphyllus, and it's obviously almost done, although it's putting up secondary flower spikes here. It's a cool day today. It's probably not going to get above 60 Fahrenheit, so there aren't many bees around, but when it's warm, it's full of bumblebees. Another roamer's fescue. I have two kinds of checker mallow in the yard, and I bought a few without realizing that the previous owners had two of them already. So this is Sidalcia malviflora virgata, which has a nice big dark pink flower, and then that's the native tall camas, and there's the other checker mallow, Sidalcia campestris, which is much taller flower spikes, and this one doesn't have any flowers left anymore, but very small pale flowers. But I stuck in a cosmos here, given to me by Lisa, and I planted a sunflower seed there, one of the two queens. And then one of my favorite plants in the yard that was already here is this thing called either blue blossom or California lilac. It's a Ceanothus thursiflorus, which is native to Oregon, but it only gets up to the southern coast, and it's probably the #1 pollinator plant in the yard until my other Ceanothus get big. But here's another yellow-faced bumblebee. One of the more exciting groups of insects I've seen on this bush that it wasn't really that familiar with until now is the subfamily Lepturinae of Cerambicity, which are the longhorn beetles. The Lepturines are known as flower longhorns. They're mostly diurnal, gather pollen and nectar, and I've seen about 5 different species on this Ceanothus. Again, it's a cool day, so there's not much going on. And the last few plants here are a native aster, which is no longer in the genus Aster. It's Symphyotrichum subspicatum, but purple flowers will be on this thing in the late summer. And another native Delphinium, which I deadheaded and is now putting on some new growth, so it's still alive. And there's one of the columbines that I just plucked in the ground. And one of the weeds that I'm constantly battling here, will be constantly battling, is field bindweed, and it's morning glory family, non-native, and it has these extensive root systems underground that have lots of stored energy. And I pull up about 10 to 15 sprouts a day, and hopefully at the end of the decade I will have exhausted the root system and it'll no longer exist here. And here's another one here. I dug up 20 yesterday. I just pull them. Sometimes the root comes up deep, sometimes I dig deeper to get more of the root. Anyway, that's the first video of Calliope Corner.